Welcome to the Care Right podcast, your go-to resource for all things elder care. Guiding us through this journey is Annalee Kruger, the founder of Care Right Incorporated, and she has been steadfastly supporting families across the United States. Each episode brings you expert insights, innovative strategies, and practical advice, ensuring that you're well equipped to provide the best possible care for your loved ones. Expect to gain valuable knowledge, learn from real-life stories, and get inspired to take action in your own caregiving journey. So buckle up as we dive into an in-depth discussion of elder care planning and together embrace the journey of caring for aging loved ones on the Care Right podcast.
And welcome back to another lively discussion on aging today. We are the podcast where together we explore the many options to aging on your terms. You can find Aging Today and our 7 years of past programs on our website, and it is new and improved, our website. All you got to do is go to agingtoday.us and you can pick up any of our past programs and other resources and guests that have been on in the past. You can communicate with them through the website. You can also follow us if you are a podcast follower. You can go to the podcast channels such as Spotify, Pandora, Apple, YouTube. There are some, I think we're on about 15 different channels. So any of your favorites, all you got to do is look us up, Aging Today, follow us, and you can join the other 200,000 listeners around the world that are following and tuning in to Aging Today. And then finally, I would like to hear from all of you, our listeners out there. We want to know the questions that you are asking on the aging process. And we want to know that if you have any aging experts that you feel would be beneficial to all of us, reach out to me, your host, Mark Turnbull, and my email is mark@agingtoday.us. Well, about 12 years ago, we got into the in-home care side of the business, and we quickly realized that a lot of people had a lot of questions about the aging process. So we started and implemented Aging Today. It actually started out as Aging in Portland. It was a combination radio and podcast channel, but then we went straight podcast about 3 years ago. And the reason why we created this, as most of you know, is that we created it because there were so many unanswered questions, and people really didn't even know the questions to ask on the aging process. So that was the impetus behind Aging Today. 7 years later, we have a great following, and we're just delighted that so many of you have reached out to us through emails and have asked for a lot of your questions to be answered, and we put on many, many guests to be able to, reach that goal. So we today have a guest that has a very similar background in the sense that she cares deeply about the aging process and, all of the surprises that come up amongst families and the questions that they don't even know what to ask. So she's created a company, and we're going to be talking today with Annalee Kruger, and she's the owner and the founder to Care Right and then co-founder to Plant for Life. And we're going to get into a deeper dive into all of these types of questions and developing an aging plan so that you can, age the way you want to do it, and so that you can remain independent in your own home to your very last breath. So, Annalee, welcome to Aging Today.
Thank you for having me as your podcast guest today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you on because we are a kindred heart, and you've as I learned, you've been doing this for 30 years. I've been only doing it for about 12 years, and I know that there's much that I can learn from you and all the journey and that you've been on over the last 30 years. But before we get into this, we always start our podcast off with, for our guests, and we want to know what's in your story. We're not interested in what's in your wallet, unless you got a lot, okay? But we are interested in what's in your story. How did you get to the place where you are today and what led up to it all?
Yeah, so I have to say, not to toot my own horn, but it is an interesting background. So my grandparents moved in with us on the farm in Iowa in the 1970s, because back then, if aging loved ones couldn't cut it at home, the only option they had really was to go into a nursing home, because we didn't have all these different levels of care back then. Right. So I learned early on just the aging process just from my grandparents and taking care of my grandmother. My grandfather lived with us mostly because he needed the socialization and people to be around him and the engagement. He didn't need care at all. He was still riding horses with us and combining with us a year before he passed away. So I learned early on about just the aging process and the importance of family in that whole process as well, just helping each other out. But the reality is that if you don't have enough supports in place and working together as a team, as a family, then those relationships can really fracture and become broken. So I always say that having my grandparents living with us when I was little really shaped me into wanting to go into that aging and caregiving space. So I went and got my social work degree and worked in long-term care communities and continuing care retirement communities, CCRCs, with all of the different levels of care. I worked in those for 18 years. First as a social worker and admissions person. So I was the person that people always met with when they came in to do the tour. It was always the adult kids that came in to do the tour. And you can understand why, because mom's in the hospital. She had a stroke. Hospital says, here's a list of facilities. Go find one by noon tomorrow because we're discharging your loved one. And the kids are always blindsided by how that goes, by how that process works. So they would come to the care facilities that I worked at, and they would just come with this whole list of, the facilities that the hospital discharge planner gave them, but they had no idea what questions to ask, what to look for. The tour would take about an hour, but I was spending 2 and 3 hours at a time with each family because they had so many questions about aging and dementia and end of life and what is Medicare going to pay for. And then when I would ask these adult kids, and sometimes they would bring the healthy parent with them, do you have a living will, power of attorney? Do you have long-term care insurance? Are there veteran benefits? The answers were always the same. I don't know. Our family never talks about stuff like this. Or we tried to get this information, but our parents gave us so much pushback that we quit trying because it was hurting the relationship. So after 18 years of really a variation of the same predicament that these families find themselves in, which is crisis, I said, there's got to be a better way. And that better way is to plan ahead. And let's start talking about the what whens of aging sooner rather than later and put a proactive aging plan in place and normalize as a family that we're going to have some conversations about aging or dementia or what kind of care mom and dad need so that everybody can start working more as a team and communicate much better as a family.
Yeah, and we found the same thing as we were going along. I mean, it's universal, and we were talking a little bit about the generation of my parents. They're in their 90s, and it was a very private, community of a population of people. They just didn't talk about those things, and yet my parents did a really good job of preparing. They got the trust going and they got all the paperwork done, but they didn't really communicate it with their children. There's 5 of us, and until the very, very end. And when I mean the very end, my dad passed away last November, and we moved in August of last year. But I really didn't know anything, and I'm in the business of it, so. It's a daunting task if you've been blindsided as children, and so what you're doing is you want to remove the blinders from the families and bring everybody to the center of the circle to have the real conversations about what are the wishes.
Yeah, because if you don't, You're going to have to at some point. And that's when you're in crisis. That's when dad's had his stroke, or mom's a caregiver to dad with dementia and she just died. Well, and then that's when families are blindsided, and I'm out here trying to scream from every rooftop, don't let this happen to your family. Like, we know that the crisis is going to happen, so let's be real about it. Let's start talking about the what whens and what is our aging plan. What if mom and dad can't stay at home? Let's bring the whole conversation together as a whole family, and mom and dad included if they're able to participate. But let's plan ahead and not wait until we're in crisis mode, because then you're not going to have the best care options, and emotions are high and time is limited, and you will have to make very big decisions quickly. And that's not when you want to find out that you're the power of attorney and you don't even have the documents, or worse, mom and dad never got their power of attorney documents or living will in place. And now you're paying through the nose on attorney fees at the 11th hour because you need after hours help, right? Mm. So let's plan ahead and save some time, money, and stress.
What are the top questions that families have when they come to you?
Well, the reality is that despite my best efforts of trying to get families to plan ahead and come to us saying, hey, you know what, I'm aging. I don't want to be a burden on my kids. Can we schedule a time to talk and let's put a plan together? Or the adult kids who are saying, hey, I have aging parents. We should probably put a plan together because at some point something's going to happen. So the reality is 92% of my families come to me, and it's usually the adult kids because they are the burned out family caregivers. They don't always realize until they are so burned out that they're a burned out caregiver. So one question is, how did we let this get so out of control? Like, how did we let mom and dad get so fail so miserably at home with us as adult kids who are trying their best to take care of mom and dad and support them? But not everybody is wired to be a caregiver. Not everybody has the capacity because they have, their own very full life. So that's one of the questions is how did we let it get so far out of control that now our relationships all across the board are really strained, and caregiving has affected our finances and my own marriage. So that's one question. Another question I always get is, when is the time to put a plan in place? And I always say now, right now, this very minute, let's start working together. And I say that because all the people that had major strokes last Thursday didn't wake up thinking, oh, I think I'm going to have a major stroke today, and then that's going to affect my entire family in every single way, right? So the time is now. And not to be like a, negative Nelly, but we know that none of us are going to come out of this aging and caregiving thing unscathed. So why don't we start opening the doors of communication and putting that plan in place?
Yeah, we always say
liked that.
Yeah, absolutely. We always say on this show that if you're not too busy being born, you're too busy aging. And as we age, our needs begin to become greater and greater. And if you're in denial of that, mom and dad, then you need to have a reality check and come to grips with the reality of aging, and then also educate and take the leadership. This is what I wish that all parents would do, is to take the leadership to guide their children into their aging process and inform and educate them as much as possible. That takes a lot of courage. That takes a lot of self-awareness as well.
Well, it takes all of that, but it also takes, I truly feel like one of the reasons we as healthcare professionals can't expect families to be able to make necessarily informed decisions. And what I mean by that is almost every single family, and I've worked with thousands of families in the last 30 years. I mean, I started Care Right in 2011, my own consulting company, because I saw that. I was like, oh my gosh, families need to start talking about the what whens of aging, and we need to be putting some plans in place. So I started my own consultancy in 2011. But the reality is, families are coming to me. That's why our aging plan is so almost curriculum based, because they're coming to me using assisted living and nursing home in the same sentence as if it's the same level of care, and it's not. Or they're coming to me assuming that Medicare is going to pay for all of the home care and the nursing home care and assisted living, and it's not, or they'll use Medicare and Medicaid as if it's the same program, and it's not. And so, or they think that mom and dad are doing better at home than they really are, and they're not. And so we can't expect people who don't know the lingo, don't know the jargon, don't know the industry and the landscape of healthcare to be able to make informed decisions when they're making decisions off of really bad information or assumptions.
I think a lot of times that families are in denial of the reality of mom and dad aging. And it starts with mom and dad, but I think it's also the children, because when I think of my mom and dad, I always think of them as my caregiver. I think of them as raising us, and they were the strong ones. And even up to the very end of my dad's life, I still considered him the strong one. I still considered him, in my mentality, he was still my leader. And yet his capacity had diminished, and it took me actually caring for him to begin to realize that the roles have changed. That was an eye-opener.
Yeah, denial is a great place to be until you can't be there anymore. And that's on both ends of the spectrum, right? Mom and dad's denial of, when I ask my senior clients, the Ethels and the Marvins, because my client is the whole family, right? And so when I ask mom and dads, what are your goals as you age? It is always the exact same two responses. I want to age in place at home, and I don't want to be a burden on my kids. But guess who is calling Annalee for an aging plan or a crisis solution? It's the adult kids. So there's denial on mom and dad's part, because they're like, I'm not leaving my house unless I'm in a body bag. I hear that literally every single day. And I said, well, that's a great goal, but 7% of seniors actually get to be able to stay at home. It's just not always feasible for whatever reason. And so what's the plan if staying at home, like that's the primary goal? Let's work for that. But we also have to have a plan B. And the reason is because assisted livings, memory care facilities, and nursing homes are also full of people who had that exact same goal and intention of dying at home. And it's just not always feasible. And it's denial on the kids' part, too, because we do look at our parents as the leaders of the family, and we assume that they're doing well at home when they really aren't. They're losing weight. They're losing memory issues. They're starting to have memory issues. The red flags of things not going well at home are pretty common sense once you understand what those are. Weight loss, ER visits, hospitalizations, falls, urinary tract infections, memory issues, missed medications, being isolated at home, not getting out and going to, activities or in the community. And so those and many more are some red flags. And so there's denial on mom and dad's part, and there's certainly denial on the adult kids' part, especially in this world where the profile of a typical family, nobody lives in the same zip code, let alone usually time zone anymore. And so when you call and check in on your parents, a few times a month and talk to them for 10 minutes, they sound fine. And in that generation, they're not going to say, well, gee, daughter Sally, we're actually not doing very well at home and we need help. Like no senior ever says that. There's that pride. I don't think I've ever had a senior say, yeah, you know what, I do need help. It's always you have to coax them along and then say, yeah, when I ask them, what are your challenges and struggles at home? Well, and I have a whole process, obviously, that I use with my clients, but I'll say, can you make it to the bathroom on time? Well, no, because my chair is too low and I can't get out of it. Or, I have so much shortness of breath, or I can't put my compression hose on. And so I'm winded all the time because I have congestive heart failure and I can't make it to the bathroom without being afraid of falling or running out of oxygen. Or sometimes they need oxygen and they don't know it, And so I honestly feel like if our aging loved ones had enough supports in place at home, they would absolutely be able to stay at home. But by the time it becomes apparent that they're not doing well at home, sometimes it's just they're too far gone to be able to bring them back, to be able to get them to be safe at home, because maybe they've lost so much weight or they're so demented that they're not safe at home anymore.
Yeah. And I always say that the majority of people could stay at home if they had the right support systems at home. And then it comes back to, can you afford the right support systems? And my biggest concern being in this line of work, in the in-home care side, is I can keep anybody at home. I don't care what, condition, chronic illness, disease you have. You can stay at home because the hospitals, everybody's gearing up towards more in-home care, support, but it comes back to the cost. And I'm trying to sound the alarm out there, and very few people are listening. And I don't know what the answer is. I'm not a big government person. I don't think the government should be taking care of us, but I don't see a private solution to covering the cost of in-home care. So it's going to have to be a collaboration between government and private. I don't know the answer. I just wish that we were discussing it at a greater depth and detail in our country. And the reason why is because the alarm is sounding. There are 75, I believe this is correct, 75 million baby boomers. 10,000 of those are retiring every day for the next 10 years. That's a crisis. And we only have, I think some of the experts say, 5 million caregivers nationally to care for 70. It's not a fair fight. What are we going to do?
Right.
And so somehow we got to get this conversation rolling, and that's obviously that's what we're doing today. We're trying to sound the alarm.
Well, and that's the biggest challenge. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people just can't age in place at home, even though we all want our parents to be able to do that. My 85-year-old dad lives with me in the winter months, because I'm in Florida and we're from Iowa. So who wants to be in Iowa in the winter if you don't have to be?
Yeah.
And so, we're doing everything that we can as well to honor what we know our parents' wishes are as well. But at some point there might be a time where we can't juggle everything, and it may not be in his best interest and affordable,
Yep.
And so that's one of the reasons why aging in place at home is very difficult for people to do unless they literally have millions, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars.
Yeah. Just to give you a sense of reality on that, because I am in the in-home care side, and here in Oregon, we charge $45 an hour. Do the math.
Yep.
$45 an hour times 24 hours a day, eventually someone's going to need that 24-hour assistance if you don't have family in the area, which our societies have changed. The children have moved out of the communities they grew up in. So now it's relegated to the professionals to come into the home to allow people to and you're talking $35,000+ a month to stay in your own home.
And that's provided you have one parent. If you have two parents, you don't get two for the price of one.
Yeah.
So.
No, we charge, another $10 on top of that. So we're $55 an hour for,
that's right.
You can still have one caregiver depending on obviously the needs, but you can still have one caregiver cover the time between the two parents, but it is $55 an hour. And that's just, who can afford that? I can't even afford my own services. So this is what's got me alarmed and worrying about. We've got to control the cost, and there's got to be a partnership, a collaboration between government and between private, planning to allow people to at least have the choice. And I've kind of backed off, the old adage to age in place. I don't believe that. I think it's to age in the right place.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a difference there because not everybody wants to stay at home. Some people do want to go into a long-term care community because, especially in their independent side, when they go into an independent living community, they love the socialization. And they love some of the amenities that they're not going to get at home. But it still comes at a cost. And
that's right.
You're looking at, anywhere from $6,000 to $12,000 a month, depending on the type of community you choose, that's still.
And that's just the room and board. So if you go into these other types of care communities, the continuing care retirement communities that have all the different levels of care, you may have a 500, or I'm in Naples, Florida. We have facilities that if you don't have $12 million net worth, you don't even qualify, because that's the bare minimum that what I want your listeners to know is that you, Ethel and Marvin, have to financially qualify to get into these different care communities. You have to physically qualify. And if you stay home too long and now you don't qualify to get into assisted living anymore, you only qualify to get into a nursing home, which costs more and certainly doesn't have the same look and feel and smell as your own home or assisted living. So the decisions you make today affect future care options. And you're right. Unless you truly have millions of dollars, like I talk to families every single day, and we do 5 to 10 new family consults or consultations every single day from families all across the country. And just on that consult, I give them 3 pieces of value so that they, A, know that I know what I'm talking about, but B, if they decide to not work with me, I at least want them to have some information to go on so that they can make informed decisions, if they're going to do this aging planning on their own. But when I tell them I have clients that are choosing to stay at home and they are paying $30,000, $40,000, sometimes $50,000 a month to age in place, if dad is 6'4" and mom has dementia, you're not going to be able to get one caregiver. You're going to need potentially 2, if not 3 caregivers, right? 24/7.
Yeah.
So families, their eyeballs literally bust out of their face because they're like, what? We thought Medicare paid for all of this. And that's why I do all these different podcasts and speaking engagements. And that's why I wrote my book, because it's like families need to wake up and say, you know what, we have aging parents. If mom and dad aren't going to talk to us about it, we need to then put on that leadership hat and say, look, mom and dad, I love you, but I don't know what's best for you. And we're in uncharted water here. We're in uncharted territory. We need someone to help us put an aging plan in place so that our family relationships don't fall apart. You would hope that the aging process brings families together, but I'm here to tell you that it does not. 92% of my clients come to us in crisis where mom had a stroke. She's the caregiver to dad with dementia. Kids are like, oh my gosh, we didn't know dad was so bad. No wonder mom had a stroke. And I'm like, well, nobody should be surprised when the primary caregiver has a major health issue or dies prematurely because of caregiver burden. That can all be prevented if we put that aging plan in place where mom and dad have enough supports in place at home and the adult kids have enough supports in place so that they don't have to keep leaving work for 2 and 3 weeks at a time and miss all that work and fly for $1,200 every airfare that is at crisis if they have to get to Arizona because that's where mom lives. And a lot of my clients, they're the power of attorney or stepping in as caregivers for up to 6 elderly loved ones. And they're just darting across the globe because it's like, oh, now Aunt Hilda is in the hospital and I'm her power of attorney. And the blended families, it can get really dicey really quickly. So we need to help support these families and educate them so they can make informed decisions. And that's why your podcast is so critical.
Yeah. And the work that you're doing as well.
The work that we're all trying to do.
Yeah. And it's a collaboration of education and getting resources out to the people. And I think the biggest concern that I have and the biggest accomplishment that any family can have is to finally sit down at the table and have this conversation about what they want to do in preparation. You've got to prepare. You've got to make a plan. And that's what I love your term. You call it the aging plan. And it's about making a plan. And if you don't make that plan, the old adage is, well, then you're going to succeed. If you have no plan, then it's exactly what's going to happen. You're going to have no plan. And
you're going to fail.
And you're going to fail miserably, and then it becomes a crisis. So let's eliminate the crisis out of it, because crisis is going to happen. That's just...
The crisis is going to happen. So doesn't it just make sense to be like, okay...
Let's be prepared.
because people don't get, just newsflash, we don't get healthier as we age.
Yeah.
So we need to know that going into this. So we should go in this without any rose-colored glasses on, knowing that as people age, we're going to start falling. We're going to have, changes in our cognition, most likely. We're going to become more frail. We're going to need more help and supports at home. So let's go into this with a realistic hat on so that we can make smart decisions sooner rather than later. Because if you choose to wait, you or your loved ones are going to get whatever care options are available at that time. So if dad has a stroke or mom falls and she hits her head on the kitchen sink, and now she needs to go into a facility, she's going to end up in whichever facility has an open bed at the time. And that may not be the best fit. So we need to plan ahead because, again, no one plans to fall. No one plans to have that stroke. But these things happen to millions of people literally every single day.
Yeah.
So let's just be realistic and let's start the conversations now and say, okay, here's what's working well. Here's what's not working well. I'm short of breath, or I fell once and now I'm really afraid to leave my chair. And so now they're getting weaker and they're not eating well. So, so a lot of that is just breaking down what a day looks like so that we can make sure that we have enough home care, for example, or companion care coming in, and not to be skimpy on that. Because sometimes families will say, well, or mom and dad will say, well, I don't need 5 hours of care, but they really do. They really do. So there's some denial on kind of everybody's part, and that's what's so cool about when families work with us is we can educate them and say, if your goal is to age in place at home, you have to commit to a certain amount of hours per week. Because as you know, Mark, the home care companies, for them to be able to pick you up as a client, they need to have some level of commitment because they also want you to be, successful. You can't just call them up it's not like an as needed, like, hey, George, I need a companion because I'm not doing well right now. I mean, I've had people call me thinking I was a home care company and calling me saying, hey, can you come out? Because my commode is full and I need someone to empty it. I'm like, I'm a consultant. I'm not like, we need to get you some home care. And they're like, well, I don't want to pay for that. And I was like, well, you have to.
Yeah.
Because if you can't empty your own commode, someone has to.
Yeah. That's called a service. And,
Yes.
And I think that, one of the things that we try to do is we want to take that taxi service mentality out of the equation of aging, in your own home. And what I mean by that is that I think a lot of agencies today still run that way, where they want to, who's up next? The next caregiver can go out to Mrs. Out to Jack and Jill's house. And Jack and Jill only need them for maybe an hour this week, and then that's not reality. And it's about matchmaking, because think about it. One of the greatest fears that seniors have is inviting a complete stranger into their home. So you've got to make sure that you're in the relationship business, and we want to match the right caregiver to the right client so that there's a relationship there. And if you don't have that relationship, then people begin to get really nervous, because now you've got multiple unknown people coming into your house, even if it's as simple as changing, your commode. You still don't want that. You want a familiar face. So that will help to, bridge that gap of trust. And that's a big thing amongst the senior population.
Trust and consistency, and that's why, home care companies love our referrals, because we've already set the bar or set the expectations that the more home care that you can have coming in, the more that you can leverage companion care, the more successful you, Ethel and Marvin, are going to be, but also the more successful your kids are going to be, because they're not going to have to worry, did dad make it to his doctor's appointment? Did he fall? Did he remember to take his medications? Because you have enough supports in place at home. And we can always adjust the companion schedule, right? Like when you need more help at home, like maybe you need 5 days a week instead of 3. Maybe 3 days a week isn't working for you. You need more. So we can always increase that and adjust it.
Yeah.
But you have to have that consistency of hours and that schedule so that you all, like you and that companion, can develop that relationship and work as a team. But seniors have to also go into this with an open mind as well, that if their goal is to age in place at home, there's going to have to be certain things they bend on.
Yeah.
And set those realistic expectations that, yeah, maybe the companion doesn't know your normal routine yet, but give them a chance and they will.
You're listening to Aging Today with your host Mark Turnbull and his guest Annalee Kruger, owner and founder of CareRight. CareRight assists families all across the country in navigating the complexities associated with the aging process by managing crisis situations, developing a proactive aging plan, and providing needed support to struggling caregivers. Go to carerightinc.com for more information. We'll have more with Mark and Annalee in just a moment.
Sometimes I'd like to smack old age right in the kisser. Ow!
Oh yeah, still got those moves.
I will be fabulous.
Comfort Care can help with as much or as little home care as you need. From medication reminders and meal prep to everyday chores and errands. Let us create your personalized care plan and find the perfect caregiver match so you can live your best life possible.
Call Comfort Care at 503-636-0417.
A Did You Know moment from Comfort Care Home Care of West Lynn.
Here are 5 resolutions we offer to caregivers everywhere. Take the time to care for yourself. Number 1, schedule a wellness exam with your physician. You cannot care for others if you do not take good care of yourself. Call your physician's office today to schedule an exam. Number 2, eat nutritious foods. When you are busy, it is easy to grab quick, but not necessarily healthy foods. Replace fast food meals and processed snacks with fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Number 3, sneak in exercise throughout the day. If an hour at the gym or a long walk is too time-consuming, focus on fitting in small amounts of exercise throughout the day. Park your car farther from work and take the stairs instead of the elevator. Turn on your favorite upbeat music and dance to 3 songs. You will raise your heart rate for about 10 minutes. Number 4, adopt healthy ways to deal with stress. Constantly caring for the needs of others and not yourself can lead to stress. Try yoga or meditation. You may find it calming. Make plans to see good friends as often as possible. Schedule a little me time into every day to pursue a favorite hobby, read, or watch a favorite TV show. Number 5, enjoy giving yourself a pat on the back. You sacrifice a great deal to care for others and may not receive much, if any, appreciation for all that you do. Each day, remind yourself that those you serve have a better life because of you. If you are a family caregiver that needs a break from the daily care of your loved one, Comfort Care of West Lynn can help. We all need a little break now and then. Allow us to give you some respite. Comfort Care cares. Give Comfort Care of West Lynn a call at 503-636-0417.
This message was another Did You Know moment for living your best life possible.
And now more with Mark Turnbull and his guest Annalee Kruger, owner and founder of CareRight, providing needed support to struggling caregivers, here on Aging Today.
I think we painted a pretty good picture of the villains out there as we age, okay? And there's many of them, and we've described those. So now people come to you being their guide, and you're going to guide them down the path, and you say, well, what we need to do is set up an aging plan. How do you go about doing that? What are some of the, let's walk through that scenario. If I were to call Annalee and I say, Mom, I've got mom and dad at home and they're needing more and more assistance in order for them to remain independent in their own home, and we want to make sure that they live their last chapter of their lives with as much independence and as much success that they can possibly have. How do you guide us? Where are you going to take us?
Yep. So it starts with a free consult. It starts with a free 30-minute phone or Zoom consult. Because again, Care Right, I built a national, actually international virtual consultancy. So in 2011, so it didn't take the pandemic for me to be like, oh my gosh, I have to switch to virtual. Because again, the reality is that adult kids don't live down the street like what they used to when I first started 30 years ago. So we have to be comfortable working virtually. So when families decide that they want to work with us and retain us for an aging plan, or maybe it's just the care matrix or the grab and go binder, whatever it is that they're coming to us with, every family needs a comprehensive aging plan, because we're helping the family learn to communicate better than what they may have been communicating, helping them understand aging, why one doctor's appointment really can take all day, and why, yes, you do have to take a full day of vacation, because one doctor's appointment can certainly take all day. And kids don't always understand that, or dad moves so slowly, or how can one appointment take all day? Well, because as your parents are more frail and they move around slower and you have to lug wheelchairs and walkers and stuff, it can take all day.
Let me interject a little story, because what you're saying is I'm living that. Love my mom to death. She's 93. Oh my goodness. The amount of time that it takes for her to get and she's still pretty independent, from her bedroom to the bathroom, and then to take her shower, and then to make it back to the bedroom, and then get dressed, and then, take her meds and eat breakfast, and then get into the car.
She has to go to the bathroom before she...
That's true. Yes. Yes.
Got that.
Yeah, and then you gotta have, all the pads necessary to take with you. So we have an extra bag, and that's in the car permanently, so that, at an emergency situation, you got to be prepared for all these things.
Yeah.
And, I just want families to understand that, and to take as much of the anxiety out of the equation. And so that the more prepared you are, the easier that is on mom and dad.
Right. And then you have the time at the doctor's appointment, which God only knows could take an hour or 4, depending on how backed up the doctor's office is. And mom will have to, my mom was on Lasix. So I was taking her to the bathroom literally every hour. And I carried, my bag as well. I had extra adult briefs and a couple extra outfits for her, and gloves and butt wipes and cleaning solutions and all that kind of stuff. And going to the bathroom wasn't a 5-minute thing. It could be 20, 30 minutes, depending on what I needed to do for her. Right.
Yeah.
And then the doctor, changes prescriptions. So now you have to go to the pharmacy and wait for an hour to pick up the new prescriptions. And then, we got to eat now.
Yeah.
And then mom has to go so yes, one doctor's appointment can literally, and then you have to go home and change out the pills, right? Because now there's so yes, one appointment can take all day. And
all the while you have a job,
right,
that you're now taking time away from.
That's right. And so when we talk about an aging plan, it's breaking down what's working well, what's not working well. And everybody in the family, because I facilitate the family meetings, or me and my team do, what's working well, what's not working well. We have a whole checklist and a whole process that we go through with our clients as we're developing the aging plan. We talk about falls, weight loss, memory issues, who's doing what in the family. Like daughter Sally always has to take time off work. Well, she's like, I can't do that anymore. I'm a realtor. If I'm not selling houses, I'm not making money, and so everybody gets a round robin opportunity to say what their thoughts and opinions and perspectives are, so that we can start building out a plan together. Mom and dad, what are your goals as you age? Again, it's the same thing. Age in place at home. Don't be a burden to my kids. Kids, what are your goals for your parents? I want them to be safe. I want them to be happy. I want them to have the best quality of life possible. And I want them to have the best quality of care possible. Well, the only way to check all those boxes and those goals is through an aging plan. If mom and dad need care at home, I align the care team. I've been at this for a long time. So I have a massive Rolodex of people I have vetted and companies that I have vetted through the last 15 years, so that I feel confident that if I have a client in Mississippi that I have attorney there. I have home care companies there that we can say, okay, let's align the care team so that we can get relief for you as the family. We look at their grab and go binder. What do you have in place? Where are the gaps in your planning? Do you have long-term care insurance? Who's your financial planner? Who's your doctor? Who's your attorney? Because the kids don't know this stuff. So it's really opening up the doors of communication about what's in place and what's not. And then the sub perk about this, or the other value proposition, is now the kids are understanding aging and the cost of care. And now they are in a position to say, you know what, I need to start putting my own aging plan in place and maybe get long-term care insurance or start opening the doors of communication for them and their kids as well. But we also talk about, we know your goal is to age in place at home, but just in case that's not feasible, because it's usually not affordable for everybody, we need to have that plan B in place. And what does that look like? If mom lives in Tucson, Arizona, but her 4 kids live in 4 different states, it's not feasible that their kids are going to just keep flying down every time there's a problem. The kids can't afford to keep leaving work, and their own marriages are going to start to suffer. So where does it make sense to receive the care that you need? And so sometimes that means locating up to where your kids live or one of your kids live. And that's where we do a care matrix and align, again, here's the home care companies in that area. Here's how much they charge. Here's what they can do for you. Here are the different care communities that we have vetted for you based on their performance with the state surveyors, their waiting list, what levels of care they offer. So we do that project for them. Otherwise, families are blindly touring care facilities and not knowing what questions to ask and what to look for. This way, they don't have to waste a day of vacation to be like, oh, I just toured 4 facilities that don't even offer the care that mom and dad need, or they can't afford to get into that facility. And so we also teach our clients how to be a bold advocate so that they know the lingo, they can be an educated consumer and make sure that, mom is being properly taken care of. We teach our clients how to tour the care communities. We have an 8-page checklist that we go over with them. We teach them how to interview home care companies, what questions to ask. So we teach them all of this so they can make informed decisions. And we also go through that grab and go binder and, what do you have in place? What don't you have in place? Let's put it all in one place in the binder. And that way everything is at everybody's fingertips. So it's really that whole comprehensiveness of, let's align the care team. Let's make sure that everybody has enough supports in place and what that's going to look like for not only now, but down the road so that they're not jeopardizing their future care options.
Yeah. And one of the things that you said that I want to piggyback on a little bit is many of the in-home care agencies are franchises. They're national brands. The problem with a national brand is that, and I want all of our listeners to understand this, is that those franchises are independently owned and operated. So you made the comment that you have to vet each and individual agency, and I would totally agree with that, because just because somebody gets on TV and, cites their overall company goals and the mission, and it sounds all fine and good, that mission is only as good as somebody practicing it in that individual market. So you got to make sure that you understand the concept of what the agencies can do. That's great. But still vet the individual agency, because your goals and your aspirations may be different than what they can actually perform at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this just as well as anybody, especially during COVID, people didn't have workers, or they were at capacity, and so it was very challenging during COVID, because I had a lot of clients that are like, I need to get mom and dad out of the care facility and bring them home, but there weren't home care companies they were already at capacity. So, COVID woke enough people up, not enough, but woke some families up enough to say, look, we got to figure this stuff out. Let's do this proactively. But, that's part of that care matrix that we do for families. And we personally call these different care communities. We personally call these home care companies, and we interview them and take them through our process to make sure that we feel comfortable enough to say, yep, you made the cut, so to speak.
Yeah. And a lot of these, on the community side, a lot of these, well, even on the in-home care agency side, these are corporations, and corporations, are looking out for their bottom line. And they'll tell you everything at the front door, how great they are. But when you get behind the curtain and you see, because I go behind the curtain, I see some of these communities, I see, the agencies and how they operate. That's why you have to vet individuals in your local market. The national brand, is fine. It does its thing of awareness, but that's it. It just gives you an awareness of what's available to you, but make sure that you vet those individual companies. And I love what you said, is that you equip the families with the types of questions that they should be asking. Because one of the things why we do this podcast is people didn't even know the questions. They didn't even, what questions do you ask? So I love what you're doing, and the work that you've put together is that you give the questions. You give the questions to the test, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I started Care Right, because families didn't know what questions to ask and what to look for. And they didn't understand aging and dementia. So we take them, I don't want to say it's modules, but like we take them by the hand. I built a concierge model service because unfortunately our healthcare model allows too many families and seniors to fall through the cracks. I shouldn't have such a vibrant business. Like if healthcare was doing its job, so to speak, it wouldn't allow these families to fall through the cracks. I was just talking to a family the other day. Dad's had Parkinson's for 5 years, and the family had no idea that it was progressive. They had no idea that it can be a dementing illness. They had no idea about what to expect. And that's shameful.
That is terrible.
Should not be happening.
Yeah.
But those are the clients that I meet with literally every single day. They have no idea what their loved one has. And so if you don't understand what you're dealing with or what you're up against, whether it's dementia, Parkinson's, ALS, MS, whatever, you're not going to make informed decisions because you don't know anything about the disease. And that's why it's a white glove approach, concierge model. So by the end of our aging planning, they understand what they're up against. They understand what their care options are. They understand how much care is going to cost, and they're working together as a family. And that's such a gift, because no parent wants their relationships to fall apart because of them, because of the aging process, and because of caregiving. And at end of life, they want to know that their kids are going to be okay.
Yeah, I think my experience in the last 12 years working in this industry is the healthcare system is broken. And not only is it broken, it's fractured, it's disenfranchised, it's individual silos that are not talking to each other. And it goes all the way back to the doctors. The doctors, I'm amazed at how many doctors don't know the options, that they should be sharing, like you just said, with the families on the aging process. And then I talk to countless hospitals who think that in-home care is covered by Medicare. And,
I know.
And that drives me crazy. How can you be in this industry and not know that? And so they tell, when I get a phone call, they tell, the patient and the family, oh yeah, it's covered by Medicare, call Mark. Yeah. And then I have to describe to them and explain to them that it is not. So there's so much confusion inside the healthcare industry and the system that it's just broken, and we somehow have got to bring it together. And I'm so grateful for people like you that are, fighting the battles.
Well, that's why my forehead is flat, because I keep banging my head against the wall, because I'm trying to train the healthcare industry. Like every single family needs an aging plan, right? So every attorney's client, every home care company's client, every financial planner's client, because the stuff that I deal with these families on a day-to-day business or day-to-day dealing is what derails their financial plan if they're pulled away from work because they're full-time caregivers to aging parents, or home care companies that, we need to stop working in silos. And it's been a very difficult journey trying to find healthcare providers, healthcare workers, and other professionals like attorneys and financial planners who really can, put ego aside or be coachable and say, you know what, you're right. This is affecting my client in every way. And if they had an aging plan, I'm trying to get people to start using a collaborative approach instead of being transactional and working in silos, because that's why these families are falling through the cracks in the first place.
Yeah. And if in the beginning, I find that families are very courageous. Pick me, I'll be mom's caregiver. And that's admirable. And I'm right beside them and I say, yes, do what you can. But just understand that there's limitations. Talk a little bit about some of those limitations and what happens to family caregivers in the long run that you put your own health in jeopardy.
Yeah. I actually wrote a book called The Invisible Patient, the emotional, financial, and physical toll on family caregivers because of that. Because we have, I'm in the same position. I'm helping take care of my dad. I helped take care of my mom for 4 years in the dementia journey. It's one thing when you move in with your parents or they move in with you or you sign up to be that caregiver. It's one thing when they're healthy and they can still drive and cook and feed themselves and take themselves to the bathroom. But I call it the caregiver snowball. At some point, they're not going to be able to do those things. And then that's when adult kids find themselves in over their head, or their parent loses mental capacity and they become argumentative or paranoid or demented. And then you're like, oh my gosh, what did I do? What did I get myself into? And they didn't. What I see families doing a lot is they either move in with their loved one or they have their loved one move in with them, or they quit their job because they're like, I can take care of mom and dad. But then that caregiver snowball happens, and when their house starts looking and smelling like a nursing home, or you can't get to Bible study anymore, or you can't get to, your nail appointment because you can't trust dad at home without falling or wandering out the house. They didn't develop an exit strategy and say, look, mom and dad, or look, siblings, I'm happy to help mom and dad as much as I can. But if it starts affecting my emotional health, my finances, my marriage, my own personal life or my job, this isn't going to work anymore. And that there's an assumption that everyone in the family is on the same page. There's an assumption that siblings are going to help. And there's an assumption that everything is just somehow magically going to be okay, and it's not. And those are my crisis families that call. They're like, it was fine until it wasn't, and I'm like, now it wasn't, and so now let's fix it because it can be fixed, but it's going to cost money.
Well, and I think we all have that Superman or Superwoman complex that we all carry, that we're going to come in and save the day. But then when we actually consider the cost of what that means, when you start living it out, that's when you get tired. And I mean, Christine and I moved in with mom and we're taking care of her. But I mean, I can't imagine just if it was just me, I couldn't do it on my own, because I do have, other jobs that I have to perform at. And when I have to leave the house to go do those, Christine is here to back me up. And then my sister is here to back us both up. And then I've got, 3 other brothers that can also assist. So we've got a good plan. But if you don't have that plan for the backups to the backups to the backups, you're going to find that it gets too overwhelming. And I would encourage families, have more than 2 layers of backups because those other people still have their lives to do. And if you've got something that you have to go to, let's say it's a wedding that you want to go to out of town. Well, who's going to care for mom while you're away at that wedding? And then what happens when my sister wants to go to the same wedding? Then you better have a backup to the backup. And that's what I mean by that.
Or what happens often too is, someone ends up with their own health issue. They have cancer or they have a stroke or their spouse is sick and they don't have enough bandwidth to take care of themselves or their spouse. And now mom and dad need care too. So, I mean, that's the challenge that families find themselves in. And then that's a crisis, right? Because it's like, now what are we going to do? And we don't want anybody in that vulnerable position, because that's what you're in. Yeah. Your parents are in a vulnerable position because they have to have care. Last week I was talking to yet another family that said, we really thought when mom and dad moved in with us that my siblings would help. And they're, this couple is really tired of, being the full-time caregiver and no one helping them. And they've scheduled all these different vacations through the last few years. And when they notify their siblings that, hey, we want to get away for a long weekend, well, they've had to cancel vacations and lose deposits because the kids are like, well, I can't help. I got my own plans this weekend. And that's where, 85% of my families, I'm doing family mediation. And the sad thing is all of this family discord could have been prevented if I could have gotten a hold of these families and they were willing to work with me proactively or work with CareRight proactively before the family relationships fell apart and before, all that angst happened. Now we're doing crisis management and mediation at the same time.
Yeah. We sometimes when you're not in this, when you're being introduced to the aging process for the first time, you don't know what you don't know. That's why an advocate like yourself is so critically important to families to help them, to usher them through the aging process with an aging plan. And the other thing too is it's really nice to be able to have somebody to lean on to I don't know how available you are as a consultant to your families, but a lot of families, they get to the breaking end and they just need somebody to vent. Can I vent on you? Can I throw up on Annalee?
That's right. And that's what we do. So very few times, we rarely have families that just hire us for the crisis solutions or the aging plan. Because when we, most families they have 5 to 15 gaps in their planning, or they didn't know that they could leverage technology to help mom and dad stay at home. So there's 5 to 10 action steps that need to be done. And so on that last family meeting, we'll say, okay, here's the aging plan. Here's what needs to be done. Who's going to do it? Do you want CareRight to implement and oversee the plan and do the care coordination, care advocacy, and all of that so that you guys can just be sons and daughters? Or are you going to do all of that? And 9 times out of 10, families are just on our services because it is about the relationship, usually until mom and dad have passed away, because it's such a bumpy process. Is dad's in the hospital again, now what do we do? Or mom fell, or dad's dementia is progressing. We're noticing more and more of this. And so most of our clients stay on our services until end of life, where we can then coach them about what to expect as mom's body is shutting down and her breathing changes and her skin coloring changes. And so we most of our clients are on services for many years.
Yeah. I think, families can play a huge role in the caregiving process, especially in the companionship phase. But when it gets more personal, that's when, people go, well, I really don't want to wipe my dad's ass. I just don't want to do that. Or my mom, or that was a very private generation, and they may not want their children doing that. So that's where then you need to reach out to somebody that's more independent or professional to come in and to provide those services. And I think families need to understand that, because I always say that caregiving is one of the most intimate professions in the entire world.
It is. Agree.
Where do you go, basically on a first date and, assist somebody with a shower or with toileting or what other, things that they might have, whether it's tube feeding or, there's just so many things that people are vulnerable with the type of care that they need. And that's why I say it is the most intimate profession on the planet. So,
And think about those only children, they're the only child, and they might have mom in Texas and dad in Arizona because they were divorced, and they're just darting around the country going, oh my gosh, now mom's in the hospital, now dad's in the hospital, what do we do? Or you've got daughter-in-laws or in-laws taking care of their in-laws, and they may not have liked them in the first place, and now they get thrust into the role of taking their mother-in-law to the bathroom, and it's like you're just asking for marital discord when you put your spouse in the role of caregiving, whether they love their in-laws or not. You can't assume that your spouse is going to want to take care of that person.
And I think that's where, you need assurance that you got to remove the guilt, the shame, and the judgment, that comes along with caregiving, and the boundaries that you place around caregiving, because some family members say, well, here's my boundary, and I'm not and if I don't do those things, then I'm not going, you got to be strong and say, I'm not going to fall in line with the guilt, the shame, and the judgment when the rest of the family is expecting me to pick up that.
Well, and I say this every day, don't make promises. Don't say, Mom, I promise I'll keep you out of the nursing home, or Dad, I promise you can live with me until you die. Don't make promises, because that guilt will make you do things that are far beyond your skill set, your comfort level, what you want to do. And that's where that family resentment happens. So the other mistake I see families making is not only knee-jerk reactions and knee-jerk decisions that now they're really regretting, and that's why they call us, is like, we did this and now it's not working out for us. I'm like, yeah, I know, let's fix it though. But they don't have enough family meetings and check-in points. Like, okay, Mom and Dad are living with me. Let's have a family meeting every 6 months or whatever, and say, these are some of our challenges. I need more help with this. Let's keep those lines of communication open, whether it's a group text, or some people have a Google family calendar. Like, Dad has 3 PT, physical therapy appointments this week. I can't get him to any of them. So who's going to help me with this? And just, have that kind of, like, if you run a business or if you're an employer and you have quality assurance meetings with your staff and your safety meetings, the family is the same thing. You have to have quality assurance meetings. Like, how is this working out? What's working well? What's not working well? What do we need to add, or who do we need to add to the care team, or who do we need to remove from the care team? Maybe it's the attorney, or maybe it's, someone else, a physician that's not listening to you and your concerns. So we have to constantly be reevaluating to make sure that everything is going okay for literally everybody.
Yeah. And sometimes I even, with fear and trepidation, am reluctant to share with my listening audience that I've moved in with my mom and dad, because then they think, well, that's the gold standard, and that, great are you, Mark. And I think people need to understand that my situation's a little bit different. Not only do I have a network of people surrounding me, but I've got 100 caregivers surrounding me, professional caregivers, and because I own an in-home care agency, I have a hospice company, and we do the whole gamut, and I'm prepared for this, and many families are not prepared, and I just want to make sure that everybody, that's admirable if you want to keep mom and dad independent in their own home and you want to move in with them, but just consider the cost and be realistic to the cost that's going to play on your individual life. And everybody's situation is different. I'm no better than anybody else if you choose not to keep mom and dad, or you choose not to go home with mom and dad. I just want to make sure that everybody understand that. Take away the guilt, the shame, and the judgment. You can only do what you can do based on your resources, your experiences, and forget the rest.
Yeah. Speaking on just that topic of, living together with an aging loved one, it's hard. It's hard for them, and it's hard for us as their adult kids. As the adult kid, you lose some sense of privacy. You can't do the things in your house that maybe you would want to do, or you lights out at 9 o'clock because that's when Dad goes to bed, or if he doesn't wear his hearing aids, and everything is really loud, and or there's 7 doctor's appointments this month. And it's like, how am I going to run my business and get them to all these doctor's appointments? Like, so people just don't know what they're getting themselves into until they're in it. And then they're like, oh my God, I'm in over my head, but I promised Dad I'd leave him, that he could stay with us and not end up in a facility. Well, that's why I really try. That's why I do so many of these podcasts and speaking engagements, is to help families be educated so that, if you do end up moving in with your parents or vice versa, they move in with you, you don't have to feel guilty when it's not working. And that's why I strongly encourage everybody. We have to have a family meeting that talks about the exit strategy, that this isn't going to work if you keep falling, or, if you won't wear your CPAP and you're sleeping and falling all the time because you don't have enough, you're not sleeping well. There's a lot of different things that families realize when they live together that, oh, this isn't working, or little kids running around can be really annoying to aging parents. They're like, they should be, what is that, seen and not heard?
Yeah.
That's not how parents parent anymore.
Well, and my as you were talking about that, and we've had this discussion, it was like, okay, well, when you sit down with your family and with Annalee and you have this conversation, write out your aging plan in pencil, because it's going to evolve. It's going to change. There's nothing permanent about it. Am I right on track with that? Because with pencil, you can erase and you can say, okay, me staying in my mom's home served a purpose for a time, and now it's ready to make another step and reconsider the care plan, the aging plan.
Our aging plan encompasses current care needs and future care needs, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff in the middle. And that's why most families stay on services with us, because then when there's that next hospital stay, then this is what we need to do now. But at least it's a framework. But that's again why most people stay on services, until they pass away, because it's just, they need that hand holding that they're not getting from anyone else. One thing too, before we close down is I would say that the biggest complaints that my clients that are living with their parents is privacy. Especially if Dad has dementia and he has his days and nights mixed up and he's walking into your bedroom at 3:00 in the morning wanting pancakes. The spouse is only going to be supportive of that for so long. But also smoking or drinking. If your parent is a smoker, cigarette smoker or whatever, and you're not, that's a challenge, right? Pets is another challenge. If you have a pet or your parent has a pet and they don't get along, or the pet is, not house broke or sick, and now you're putting eye drops in Mom and Dad, and you're putting, insulin in the cat. That's just one more. Yeah. That's just one more thing you have to take care of. So these are just kind of, and there's 50 other things too, but these are just kind of little pointers that you have to think about. How is your day-to-day living going to be changed if you move in, or if you have an elderly person staying with you? How's that going to affect your family? Who's going to pay for what? What's that lights out time going to be, so that you can still feel like you can have people over and not be disruptive to them? And is your house senior safe? Do you have stairs, or where are they going to live? Or is your house a fall hazard?
Well, I think we've established the fact that every family should have an Annalee in their corner. And so I highly encourage all of our listeners to reach out to Annalee and begin the conversation, begin the process. Annalee, what would be the best way for our listeners to reach out and contact you and at least begin the process? Your website, or is there a phone number? Or what's the best way?
Yeah, the website, I've made it as easy as possible for people to make referrals and to book their consult on the calendar website. So carerightinc.com is the website, and you can scroll through there, and there's probably like 15 different boxes of book a consult now. I want to learn more. So the first step is really identifying that, hey, you know what, this makes sense to me, and B, going on the website carerightinc.com and booking your 30-minute consult. You'll either be meeting with, you'll be meeting with one of my teammates for your 30-minute consult. That's the first place to start. Let's just talk. Let's just start the conversation and see if planning or crisis management you're either going to be a planner or you're going to end up in a crisis situation. So there's
you choose.
Not a big difference there.
Yeah, you choose.
You choose.
Yeah, and then also on your website, there's multiple resources that people can reach out for. So you have a book. And then you also have a podcast. Tell us a little bit about the podcast. You address some of the same issues that we're discussing here today on Aging Today.
I do. Yep, I do. And I have guest speakers that come on from time to time, too, that are additional resources as well for families. So I have attorneys, I have home care companies, I have, reverse mortgage, I have financial planners. So I also, because that's what most of us do anyways, we have these really cool, amazing guests that we want to introduce our listeners to. But yeah, it's the Caregiver Crisis podcast. It's not as trafficked as yours. It's not been 100% of my priority because most of my clients come to us in crisis. So I tend to just focus on the clients. I haven't spent.
Well, it's good to know that there's additional resources out there, and it's like two ants fighting over who's going to eat the elephant. There's enough room for your podcast, my podcast, and everybody else's out there because it's extremely important that we get the information out. And everybody's style is a little bit different. And so I highly encourage people to get onto your website. And, the thing that I like about what you're doing is the personal consult that you can sit down and have this virtual conversation with families and address some of the issues that are at hand before they get into a crisis.
Yeah. When I built Care Right in 2011, like I said, I went virtual right away because families just don't live near each other. But when I first opened my door, so to speak, I have families all across the country, and they'd be like, well, and I built my business in Milwaukee, and they're like, well, I can't leave California. I can't fly back to Milwaukee. I just got home from staying with mom for 2 weeks because she just got out of the hospital. And I said, well, you don't have to fly back. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, at the time, all we had was Skype. And I said, we need to work smarter, not harder. Yeah. So I said, nobody needs to go anywhere. We just do this over Skype. And they're like, oh my God, this is so great. How come no one's doing this? And how come I always end up having to fly back and forth? I'm like, well, that's because you don't have an aging plan. But and so it saves families time and money of just even that crisis airfare, so 3 or 4 crisis airfares, you could have had an aging plan.
Absolutely. Well, Annalee, it was a pleasure and a delight to have you on Aging Today, and I highly encourage all of our listeners to go onto your website. Once again, the website is
carerightinc.com, CARERIGHTINC.com.
All right. Well, thank you once again for being on Aging Today, and it was a great conversation. And I highly encourage all of us to be proactive rather than reactive in the aging process.
Agree. And thanks for all that you're doing and your team as well at your home care company and your hospice companies.
Sometimes I feel like a fish swimming upstream, but we're going to continue swimming, and we're going to be like Nemo. We're going to keep swimming and swimming and swimming. All right.
Got it.
All right. This is Mark Turnbull, your host, and I want to thank all of you for tuning in to Aging Today.
Thank you for tuning in to the Care Right podcast. We hope today's discussion has provided you with valuable insights. If so, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with others who might find it helpful. Remember, Care Right is more than just a podcast. It's a community dedicated to supporting family caregivers with comprehensive care planning, crisis management, and resources for every stage of aging. Stay connected with us for future episodes as we continue to explore essential topics in aging planning, elder care, and financial planning. Until next time, take care, plan wisely, and remember, you're not alone in your caregiving journey.